The Galactic Council's fleet hovered in deep space, surrounding the massive, rusted warship. It drifted lifelessly, its hull covered in centuries of dust and debris. The ship looked ancient, forgotten by time itself. Aboard the Council's command ship, High Commander Vecran watched the relic on the holographic display. He let out a dry laugh. This is what we came all this way for. A pile of rust. The officers around him chuckled. The ship was old, outdated, a mere relic of some forgotten species. It had no shields, no visible power source, and no sign of life. It was nothing but space junk. Ambassador Keeler, a historian from the auxiliary species, did not laugh. He studied the ship with narrowed eyes. Something about it made his scales itch. "Commander," he said, his voice uneasy, "we should proceed with caution. This ship, it does not match any known designs." Vecran waved a hand dismissively. "It doesn't matter. Whatever race built this thing is long gone. The Council has ruled this galaxy for centuries. If this ship was important, we would have known about it." A crew member turned from his console. "Commander, the salvage team is ready. They're requesting permission to board." Vecran smirked. "Permission granted. Tell them to be quick. There's nothing here worth studying." Two small shuttles broke formation and flew toward the warship. As they got closer, the pilots activated their scanners. The readings were strange. No energy signatures, no life signs. But something was there. A faint hum, almost undetectable. Inside the shuttle, Captain Relox frowned. "Sensors are picking up something. The ship is not completely dead." His co-pilot, Lerna, shook her head. "That's impossible. No working systems, no active core. It's a floating graveyard." Still, unease settled in the cockpit. The warship's design was alien, yet something about it felt deliberate. Unlike other derelict ships they had encountered, this one had no visible battle damage. It had not been destroyed. It had simply stopped. The shuttles reached the docking bay and latched onto the warship. The airlock opened with a metallic groan, and the salvage team stepped inside, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Inside, the ship was silent. The walls were thick, reinforced, built for war. Strange symbols, unlike any known language, were etched into the metal. The air was stale but breathable. Relox tapped his comm. "We're inside." No signs of life. Proceeding with the scan. The team spread out, moving cautiously. Their footsteps echoed through the empty halls. Dust covered the floors, untouched for centuries. They'd reached the control room and powered up a scanning device. Then, a flicker. The screens on the consoles blinked to life, showing static. A low hum filled the air, like a machine waking from a long sleep. "Did you do that?" Lerna whispered. Relox shook his head. "No. The ship, it's turning on by itself." On the command ship, alarms blared. The holographic display flickered, showing a sudden energy spike from the warship. "Report." Vecran barked. "Commander, the ship is activating." A technician shouted. "Power levels rising. Unknown source." Keeler's breath caught in his throat. "I told you, this ship is not ordinary." Inside the warship, the salvage team froze as the control panel displayed a message. The words were strange, unfamiliar, but then, as if recognizing their presence, the text shifted, translating into Galactic Standard. "You should not have come." Lerna's blood ran cold. "We need to leave. Now." Relox turned to signal retreat, but the doors slammed shut. On the command ship, the signals from the salvage team cut to static. Vecran shot to his feet. "Get them back online." "No response, sir." The warship's lights brightened. Its engines, dormant for centuries, roared to life. The Galactic Council's fleet watched in stunned silence as the forgotten relic began to move. And for the first time, fear crept into their voices. The Galactic Council's fleet hovered in tense silence as the ancient warship, once believed to be nothing more than a lifeless relic, slowly came to life. Flickering lights illuminated its hull, and deep within its metal frame, unseen systems whirred and clicked as if waking from a centuries-long slumber. High Commander Vecron's hands tightened into fists as he stared at the holographic display. The salvage team's signal had gone completely dead. No voices, no readings, only eerie static filled the command deck. "Get me a visual inside that ship," he barked, but the officers could only shake their heads in frustration. "No response, sir. It's as if something is blocking our scanners." Vecron clenched his jaw. This was impossible. The ship had been a floating corpse just moments ago. "Open a channel," he ordered. "Salvage team, respond immediately." Silence. Then, suddenly, a garbled transmission crackled through the speakers. It was distorted, broken, barely recognizable. But beneath the static, a voice could be heard, filled with terror. "We, not alone. Something's awake." The message cut off abruptly. A shiver ran down Killer's spine. The historian had warned them, but no one had listened. He stepped forward, his voice firm despite the unease in his chest. "Commander, we must recall all forces. Now, this ship is not just some abandoned wreck. It's something else. Something dangerous." Vecron shot him an irritated glare. "You're suggesting we run from an empty ship?" Killer's gaze darkened. "Does that ship look empty to you?" Before Vecron could respond, a new alarm blared across the command deck. The warship's energy readings were rising sharply. "Commander," a technician shouted, panic creeping into his voice. "The ship is charging weapons." The word sent a wave of shock through the room. That wasn't possible. The ship was ancient. How could it still have functioning weapons? Vecron's mouth opened, but before he could issue an order, the warship fired. A beam of crackling, violet energy lanced through space, striking one of the smaller escort cruisers. The blast was instantaneous. No shields activated, no countermeasures deployed, because no one had expected a dead ship to attack. The cruiser erupted in a fiery explosion, debris scattering in all directions. The command deck was deathly silent for a moment, shock freezing everyone in place. Then the screaming began. Officers scrambled to reroute power, calling out frantic damage reports. The reality hit them like a crashing wave. This was no ordinary derelict. This was a predator waking from hibernation, and they had been foolish enough to poke it. Vecron snapped into action. "All ships, prepare to fire. Take that thing down now." His fleet, once positioned arrogantly around the ancient vessel, now scrambled for attack formation. The flagship's main cannons powered up, targeting the warship with precision. "Fire!" Vecron roared. The fleet's weapons unleashed a storm of plasma and kinetic rounds, streaking through space toward the warship. The blast struck the hull, only for them to fizzle out against an unseen barrier. The warship remained unharmed, untouched. The Council's fleet watched in growing horror as the rust-covered behemoth finally spoke. A deep metallic voice, ancient and emotionless, resonated through every ship's communication system. "Your weapons are insufficient." Killer's breath hitched. This ship was speaking. It was aware. Vecron was about to issue another command when the warship moved. Despite its rusted, broken appearance, it turned with an eerie grace, shifting its massive bulk as though it had never been asleep. Then more words came through the speakers, this time colder. "You have made a mistake." The warship's thrusters flared to life, and in an instant, it vanished from its position, moving so fast that it seemed to blur against the stars. It reappeared behind one of the battle cruisers. Before anyone could react, another violet beam speared through the ship, splitting it apart like paper. More explosions rocked the battlefield. Fear spread like wildfire. Vecron's voice was tight with disbelief. "That's not possible. A ship that old, it shouldn't be able to move like that." Keeler swallowed hard. "That's because it's not just an old ship." He turned toward the commander, his expression grim. "Sir, I believe this is human technology. The weight of his words sank into the room like a stone. Human. A name that had not been spoken seriously in centuries. A race that was more legend than reality, believed to be extinct or long vanished. But if this ship was human-made, if it had survived all these years with such terrifying power, then what else had humanity left behind? Vecron, still struggling to process, forced himself to push aside his growing fear. I don't care who built it. We destroy it. But deep inside, a terrible realization was taking hold. This warship was not acting like a mindless machine. It was calculating, testing them. And worst of all, it did not seem to be fighting at full power. It was playing with them. The fleet began to pull back, ships turning desperately to flee. But the warship made no move to pursue. Instead, it sent out one final transmission, a single message that chilled every being to the core. You are not ready for war with us. And then, without warning, the ship powered down once more, returning to its eerie, silent drift, as if nothing had happened at all. The Galactic Council's fleet drifted in uneasy silence, their weapons still locked onto the ancient warship. It had fired only 2 shots, yet 2 ships lay in ruin, their wreckage floating lifelessly in the void. High Commander Vecron's face was pale, his fingers trembling as he gripped the command console. "Status report," he barked, though his voice lacked its usual authority. His officers scrambled to assess the damage. But the results were clear. This was not a battle they were winning. "Commander," an officer stammered, his voice filled with disbelief. "That ship, it just powered down again." Vecron's eyes narrowed. The warship had returned to the same dead state they had found it in, floating lifelessly as if nothing had happened. But the Council fleet knew the truth now. This was no derelict. It was a predator, and it had only woken up for a moment. "It's toying with us," Vecron muttered, cold realization sinking in. "It let us live." His words sent a shiver through the command deck. A warship with that much firepower, that much speed. It could have annihilated them all in seconds. Yet, it chose not to. Historian Keller stepped forward cautiously. "Commander, this confirms my worst fear." He took a deep breath before continuing. "This ship is human-made. And if this is just one of their old warships, we may have provoked something far worse than we ever imagined." His words hung heavy in the air. The Galactic Council had long believed humanity was extinct. Their records spoke of a species that had vanished from the galactic stage centuries ago, their worlds abandoned, their fleets missing. But if a single forgotten relic still possessed this kind of power, then what of the rest of their fleet? What if humanity had never truly disappeared? Vecron's mind raced. If Killer was right, then they had unknowingly attacked a warship built by the most fearsome species in history, and they had survived only because it allowed them to. His instincts screamed at him to retreat, to put as much distance between them and the warship as possible. But something stopped him. Fear twisted in his gut. What if leaving it unchecked was even more dangerous? What if this was only the beginning? A sudden alert flashed across the command screens. "Commander, we're detecting a signal," an officer called out. "It's not from us. It's coming from the warship." Vecron's blood ran cold. The ship was transmitting something. Not to them, but to somewhere else. Killer's voice was barely a whisper. "If it's calling for reinforcements, then the galaxy is in danger." The warship, silent and unmoving, had just sent a message. But to who? And what would come next? The Galactic Council's fleet remained frozen in space, their weapons still locked onto the silent warship. Yet no one dared to fire. Not after what they had just witnessed. The rust-covered behemoth had torn through their forces with terrifying precision. Then, just as suddenly, it had powered down, as if losing interest. But now something even more unsettling had happened. It had sent a signal. High Commander Vecron's breathing was slow and measured, his mind racing with the implications. "Are we able to trace it?" he demanded. His officers worked frantically at their stations, their expressions grim. Finally, one of them turned to him. Sir, the signal isn't directed at us. It's broadcasting into deep space. A set of coordinates. A message on an unknown frequency. The officer hesitated, then added in a hushed tone, "Commander, what if it's calling for backup?" Historian Keller's expression darkened. If this is human technology, then we may have just made the worst mistake in galactic history. He swallowed hard, eyes locked onto the ancient vessel. There's something you don't understand, Commander. Humans never built just one warship. Silence fell over the bridge as the meaning of his words settled in. Vecron straightened. We need to leave. Now. He turned to his crew, but before he could issue the order, the warship suddenly moved. It was slight, just a shift in position, but it sent waves of panic through the Council fleet. Commander, an officer yelped. The ship is repositioning itself, aligning with the coordinates it transmitted. Vecron's hands clenched into fists. You mean it's going somewhere? Keeler exhaled sharply. Or someone is coming. A heavy weight pressed down on the bridge. The signal had gone out. There was no stopping it now. Then, a new alert blared across the control panels. Multiple signatures detected. The officer's voice cracked with fear. Ships, emerging from deep space. Vecron's eyes snapped to the view screen. The fabric of space itself twisted and rippled as massive shapes began to materialize. Not one, not two, dozens. The Council fleet watched in horror as an entire human battle group emerged from the void, their hulls ancient yet unscarred by time. They had received the signal, and they were here. The void of space rippled with unnatural distortions as the massive warships emerged from the abyss. The Galactic Council fleet watched in stunned silence as one, then two, then dozens of colossal vessels materialized around the ancient warship. Their hulls, though aged and worn, bore the unmistakable marks of human craftsmanship. Angular, brutal, built for war. High Commander Vecron's throat went dry. Impossible, he whispered. Humans were wiped out centuries ago. Historian Keeler stood frozen, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. No, he said slowly, his voice barely audible over the alarms blaring through the command deck. We just assumed they were. The Council fleet had come prepared for a salvage operation, a routine mission. At worst, they had expected minor resistance from automated defenses. But this was something else. They had stumbled into a nightmare. Commander. A panicked officer's voice cut through the chaos. We're being scanned. All of us. Vecron's eyes flickered to the warships on the screen. No weapons had been fired. No warning had been given. Yet the tension was suffocating. It was as if the humans were studying them, deciding whether they were even worth acknowledging. Then, without warning, the communications channel crackled to life. A voice, deep and steady, filled the bridge. It was human. You have entered restricted space. The statement was calm, controlled. But there was something chilling beneath it, a certainty that sent a shiver through Vecron's bones. The officer monitoring communications swallowed hard. Sir, they're transmitting fleet ID codes. His voice trembled as he read the name of the lead ship. Hess Revenant, First Fleet of the Terran Dominion. Keeler gasped. The First Fleet. His voice was barely a whisper. That was humanity's greatest war armada. But it was lost centuries ago. Vecron's mind raced. If this was the First Fleet, then humanity's extinction had been a lie. Or worse, they had never left at all. They had simply been waiting. The human voice spoke again. State your purpose, or prepare for termination. The message was simple, cold. The Galactic Council's mighty fleet, one of the most powerful forces in the known galaxy, now stood utterly powerless before a force they had mocked as extinct. And from the silence of the void, the human ships began powering up their weapons. The Galactic Council fleet was paralyzed, trapped in the shadow of an armada that should not exist. On the bridge of his command ship, High Commander Vecron felt sweat bead on his forehead. The sheer presence of the human fleet was suffocating. Their weapons had not fired, yet, but the message was clear. State your purpose, or prepare for termination. Historian Keller's hands trembled as he stared at the screen. Commander, we must answer. Now. His voice was strained with fear. They are waiting, but they will not wait forever. Vecron swallowed hard and signaled his communication officer. Open a channel. A moment later, the bridge speakers crackled. Vecron cleared his throat, forcing steel into his voice. This is High Commander Vecron of the Galactic Council's exploratory fleet. We were unaware this region of space was occupied. We meant no lies. The single word cut through the transmission like a blade. The voice on the other end remained calm, but there was an edge to it now. A warning. The human fleet had already analyzed their movements, their tactics. They knew the Council fleet hadn't come in peace. They had come to claim what they thought was abandoned. And they had fired first. Then something changed. The ancient warship, the rusted behemoth that had first destroyed 2 of their ships, suddenly came to life again. Systems hummed, energy surged through its old hull, and its weapons shifted, locking onto the heart of the Council fleet. A new voice spoke. This one was different. Holder. Cold. You fired on the Revenant. The name sent a chill through Kaler. The Revenant. It wasn't just a warship. It was a legend. A name whispered in forgotten records. A name that belonged to the flagship of the Terran Dominion. The voice continued, unwavering. That was your first mistake. The Galactic Council officers held their breath. Every sensor indicated the ancient warship was charging its main cannon. One shot had been enough to annihilate an entire vessel before. Now, it was aiming for the flagship of the Council fleet. Vecron's fingers tightened into fists. He had to act now. Wait, he barked, stepping forward. We surrender. We did not understand what we were facing. His voice carried desperation, but also respect. We request parley. Silence. The human fleet remained motionless. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then, finally, the voice responded. Parley granted. The Revenant's weapons powered down, but the tension in the air did not fade. Keylor exhaled shakily. They're giving us a chance. Vecron nodded, but his stomach churned. A chance for what? Negotiation or judgment? The humans had emerged from the darkness of history, and now the Galactic Council would finally learn the truth. Humanity was never gone. They had simply been waiting. The silence that followed was heavier than anything the Galactic Council had ever known. High Commander Vecron stood frozen, his breath shallow. The human fleet had accepted the parley, but there was no relief, only dread. The HSS Revenant, the ancient warship that had annihilated their ships with ease, now loomed over them like a judge ready to pass sentence, and the rest of the Terran fleet remained motionless, their weapons primed but not yet firing. It was a warning, a reminder of who held power in this moment. A new transmission came through. Unlike the cold, mechanical voice from before, this one had a presence, commanding, human, but ancient. Commander Vecron of the Galactic Council fleet, you requested parley. You will speak. Vecron straightened, trying to steady himself. We acknowledge our mistake, he said carefully. We did not know this was Terran space. We believed humanity was extinct. The voice was amused. Dangerous. Vecron hesitated. Yes. There was a pause. Then, quiet laughter, low, bitter, and filled with something ancient. That was your second mistake. Vecron's blood ran cold. The voice continued, unwavering. Your first mistake was believing you could claim what belongs to us. Historian Kaler, standing beside Vecron, found his voice. We didn't know the truth. He swallowed hard. But we do now. Another silence stretched between them. Then, the voice spoke again. No, you don't. The bridge lights flickered as data surged through their systems. Files, records, old battle reports. But they weren't from the Council's archives. These were human records. And they told a different history. The Galactic Council had not discovered an abandoned warship. They had trespassed into a silent battlefield, a battlefield that humanity had never left. The truth unraveled before them. The Council had always assumed humans had perished in their final wars, that their once great empire had faded into myth, but the reality was far worse. The humans had never been wiped out. They had simply retreated into the void, watching, preparing. And now, when the Council had dared to trespass into their forgotten domain, they had finally returned. The human voice spoke one last time. Leave, now, and pray we do not find you again. Vecron wasted no time. All ships withdraw, immediately. Engines roared to life as the Council fleet scrambled to escape. As they fled, the human fleet did not pursue. They did not need to. The message was clear. Humanity had never been defeated. They had been waiting. And now, the galaxy knew.